This is the Get a Life podcast. Ex-Cult Conversations.
If you or someone you know struggles with addiction or alcoholism, please go to www.aa.org and find a team closest to you.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Get a Life podcast, Ex-Cult Conversations. I'm here with my friends Jackie and Gilly and Abby. We're here to discuss the issue there is with alcohol use within the Brethren. It's a subject that's very personal to me because I had a severe alcohol addiction whilst in the PBCC. To start with, I think it would be good if we shared our own experiences, what they were with alcohol use whilst inside the PBCC, and I'll now hand over to the rest of you.
Thank you, Ross. I don't mind starting. So my relationship with alcohol in the PBCC actually started very young. I think I was 12 when I was given my first glass of scotch. There was a reason for that. When I was 12, I had a little baby sister who lived for 9 days and she died. And it was the night before her burial, and I was staying with the Brethren family and was understandably quite emotional and upset. And their answer to help get me through the night was to give me a scotch. And to me, I think that probably labelled what alcohol was for me at that time. It was a way to get through and in a very emotional moment. After that, I suppose I remember mid-teens, my brother always used to keep rum hidden in his wardrobe, and we would quite frequently come back and drink rum after the meetings. And then I left at 18, and in a way, I'm quite thankful because I then sort of got to realise the dangers of alcohol and understand strengths of it and so on. And that probably saved me from drinking a lot of alcohol over a lifetime. And I really do believe that. I don't know how the others, what their relationship with alcohol was like when they're in the Brethren.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind telling my story. I'm just sitting here thinking I probably was under the influence of that longer than anybody else on here. Yeah, so very similar actually, Jackie. It was at the age of 13 that I was handed my first glass of whiskey. And again, yes, there was a reason behind that. The reason behind that was it was in the time in 1981 time when the cleanliness matter came out.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Of course, my dad, up until from when my grandfather had died till that time, my dad had been the lead. And very shockingly, Dad and Mum were shut up. And it wasn't just for the standard week. They were shut up for, I think it was 3 weeks. And there was actual talk that they weren't going to come back. And anyway, the night that they did come back was a celebration, I suppose. And I just remember Dad pouring these glasses of whiskey and all of us having one, apart from Nicola, who was only 2 at the time. But yeah, so I was 13. And that was the beginning of alcohol for me, I suppose. I wouldn't say that I was ever fully dependent on alcohol, but I certainly used alcohol over the years. Fortunately, my dad especially wasn't a big drinker and was quite frugal with how much he gave young people, which didn't make him very popular in those days. So I did used to take a bottle of vodka to my bedroom on a Saturday night and drink vodka. And yeah, I used to sneak in drinks a lot because Dad wasn't into the drinking. An interesting thing that I remember my oldest sister saying was she remembers my mum changing when alcohol became so prevalent within the Brethren. Mum was before that, quite a quiet, shy person. I certainly never knew my mum was a quiet, shy person. And I would say very dependent on alcohol. For me, as an adult, as a wife, as a mother, it was definitely used as a coping mechanism. Before my ex-husband would come home, I would, make sure I'd had a good glass of whiskey to cope with whatever came through the door, really. Obviously, I didn't think about this when I was in the Brethren, but I do feel a certain guilt of giving my children alcohol in what the people that aren't part of the PBCC will know as the communion, but the Lord's Supper. I do feel a guilt about that. But I suppose I didn't even, it was just what we did. It was what everybody did. But when I think about it now and think of the consequences of that and how wrong it is and how...
Was that something that was just expected, that you would give young children a sip of the... And just to explain to people who aren't familiar with the Brethren's way of celebrating Holy Communion, they would have bread and wine. It was usually port, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Early on a Sunday morning, excuse me, and the bread would symbolise Christ's body and the port would symbolise Jesus's blood. And everybody took a sip from the cup, didn't they?
Not a sip, it was a gulp.
Yeah. An interesting little story, I suppose. And I think a lot of parents experience this, and probably Abby has experienced it as well. So it was felt that as soon as a child reached for the emblems, the bread, that meant that the Lord was, they were ready to take the emblems. It was the Lord speaking. And if you think about it, a 5-6 month old child will reach for anything that's passing them. So often it was round about 5 or 6 months old that the child would reach for the bread normally, and then they would see the shiny cup. I remember distinctly Scott. He did like alcohol later in years, but I remember he must have been maybe 8 months old, and he had got to that stage where actually the cup, the big silver cup, frightened him.
Wow.
And I remember many being like that, and he would be pushing it away, but you had to force it down them. You really did. I remember holding his arms down and forcing the wine into his mouth. And you were being stared at. And I remember once it happened to somebody. It wasn't one of my children, but the child didn't take it. And before everybody got up to leave, the lead was actually local in that subdivision, but before everybody got up to leave, he actually got up, picked the cup up and brought it to the mother to give to the child before we left the hall.
How old was the child, approximately?
Oh, under a year.
Oh, my days.
And I think it's worth mentioning as well is that once the child has taken the communion, it's not an option after that, is it? It has to be done every single Sunday.
No, there's no option. And that's what I mean. Maybe the first week, if you just took the loaf. Yeah. But once they were regularly taking the bread and the wine, if there was 1 week that they pushed it away, you're talking about, like I say, an 8-month-old child at 6:15 in the morning, half asleep, with alcohol being pushed.
Tasting port.
And it was often the cup that they were scared of. I just remember them pushing it away, and you were so petrified that they wouldn't take it.
So with me, it was completely different because I absolutely refused for Charlie to have it.
because I am a child of an alcoholic. And Bruce Hales's standard was, and there's ministry on it, where he says it's remarkable to see a child 3 or 4 months old or so brightening up as the emblems go round and participate. So that was like the standard set by Bruce Hales.
I can actually read out that ministry if you like, Abby, because I think it's worth doing. Can. So it was said in 2006, and it was printed by the Bible and Gospel Trust. And the actual wording says, and just to explain again to outsiders, the brethren refer to the bread and the wine as emblems, don't they? That's what they call them. So he said, quite remarkable to see a child 3 or 4 months or so, and brighten up as the emblems come round and participate. Couldn't quite say what was going through their minds, but something is going through their minds. That's not natural. It's not natural. It's not a natural influence. It's just not natural.
Yes, no, it's just not natural. E.g., they shouldn't be doing
it. Yeah, I mean, you can speculate what it means.
Yeah, but like I say, it is natural for a child of that age to reach.
Oh, of course, yeah. It's a shiny cup.
To say that it's not natural to reach for something that's passing them is pretty bizarre, because a child of that age reaches for everything. And
And then in our supper, so after that standard was set, which has been there for
that's been there for
forever. Well, didn't someone change it, like JC Junior or someone, where the children could start participating in it? Someone along the line. The Lord turned a corner or some bullshit.
Before my time, but they used to have to request to participate, and you'd usually be. I didn't have to. I've had the bread and wine for I remember, but usually you'd be expected to request to participate around 12 years old, and that shows you were basically making a committal to the brethren. Whereas now, that went right out the window, didn't it? In the 60s, I think. Yeah.
Was where the Lord said, "Take, eat."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning as well that it's actually illegal for. You know the age, don't you, Jackie? That it's illegal.
In UK, it is. Yeah.
What is the actual legal
5? So under the age of 5, it's illegal to give a child alcohol.
Well, that was the road that I went down when I refused to give it to Charlie. I said, I don't agree with this at all. And I had everyone's eyes on me, giving me the glares like every supper. And it was actually the elderly women that got the most snarky about it, and they would pull Bruce in after the meeting, and they would pull me in after the meeting, and they would be like, why are you not giving your child the emblems? You know, it's the Lord's, it represents the Lord's body, and the cup is partaking of the cup is like having a kiss from Christ. Why would you deny your child of that? I was like, it's literally alcohol. I'm not giving that to my child. It's just not happening. And I'd literally take it myself, and Charlie be reaching up, because obviously it was all shiny, and I pass it on, and people would look at me like, are you off your head? Like, what about him? And they'd like hold it there to wait for me to take it back as if I'd forgotten. No, I've not forgotten. I was making a point that I was not going to feed my child alcohol, when he literally just, like, his neck muscles weren't even like formed. He couldn't hardly sit up. It was just, no.
So if the brethren claim to be like a mainstream Christian church, which is what they often do, if we draw a parallel by what you, Abby, and Anne have described the way you felt with your children, and by what one of the most common mainstream Christian churches do with communion, which is the Church of England. So the Church of England, you can christen your child into the faith, and that is perceived as the parents making a declaration on the part of the child. That child does not take communion until they've been confirmed, and confirmation is the child's decision. to do it. So generally in the Church of England, if you weren't confirmed to the faith, you would go up to the altar holding the order of service or something in your hand, and rather than receiving communion, the vicar would then just bless you rather than offer you the wine and the cup. That was the symbol. And yet here we have a church claiming to be a mainstream Christian church that is not allowing that to happen. They are basically forcing that element of committal on children, on babies, effectively. They don't know any different, do they? Quite apart from the introduction to alcohol at such a young age, which is another discussion, isn't it?
And the church we go to now, they don't actually use alcohol. They use...
No, lots of churches use non-alcoholic wine. Yeah. For that reason.
Drinking would start on a Sunday or a Lord's Day at 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, between 5:30 and 6 when I was in. And that would be the start of the day with a belly full of port. Because the men, more so than the women, it was a good mouthful or two.
Some of one of my family members, he would make sure that there was a bottle of port in the fridge for when he got home from the supper, and that's when he...
Yes, that's what Bruce's family did.
Yeah, that seemed to become a bit of a thing just before I left.
So Gilly, what was your relationship with alcohol? What's your memories of it when you were in?
Likewise. I mean, I had a different experience in the sense that my dad was probably similar to Anne's dad, was very strict with alcohol. And was very conscious of the effects of alcohol. He didn't drink much himself. But yeah, I mean, I was given it as a child. I can remember pestering Dad for a cider with lemonade in it, 11 or 12 or whatever, just because that's what kids did. I can remember being given my first beer, helping someone move house. Tesco value, 2.5% bitter. Yeah, exactly.
Was that your payment for the help?
pretty much. But I mean, again, I would have been underage when it was done, and I think the thing for me, looking back and just being brutally honest with myself, I think the thing for me was because my dad was. Because he was quite strict with alcohol, and I witnessed him refuse people alcohol if they were driving, which was very unheard of.
Good for him.
I mean, I appreciate it now, but I didn't at the time. I was embarrassed at the time. And I think the thing for me was that I went, as I grew up, and it got to an age where I would help Dad serve drinks on a Sunday and things like that. I almost went the other way to try and be fashionable, to try and be cool. I would serve overly generous alcoholic drinks just to look good in front of the people that we were entertaining.
So almost you succumb to a subconscious peer pressure there, that this is because it's cool, it's the cool thing to do. And I think that one of the things that sort of is, I've sort of looked, we'll probably come on to this later, but looking back, if we go out for a drink now, everybody's, if you go somewhere for a drink, you get a taxi, you go to a pub, whatever, restaurant, everyone's quite happy for people to get drunk and to have a good time. The one thing I always remember was that if anybody did ever get drunk, i.e. to the point of, either throwing up or, then feeling the effects of alcohol, i.e., being merry and all the rest of it, that would almost be, you'd be taking the mick out of, because you couldn't, in their eyes, you couldn't control it.
Yeah, you couldn't hold your drink was what was said, wasn't it?
Yeah. Whereas if for people now, if we go out with friends and have a drink, we're all quite prepared for each other to get drunk, because that's
they don't get drunk. Literally, the amount they drink.
But that's because it's in their bloodstream all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
I have a memory of a 3:30 preaching on a Sunday, going back a long time. I have a memory of a young brother about my age at the time running out the meeting room, being sick over everybody as he ran out, and the smell of beer was unmistakable.
Oh no!
Well, I remember at a Coventry Fellowship meeting, a certain young brother from Ireland had been drinking Pernod of all things, and he was trapped because the room was full in an aisle seat. Do you remember it?
Oh no.
And he stood up and it was just going everywhere. And he was so, do you remember the ambulance came and everything?
Yeah.
He had to go to hospital and have his stomach pumped out.
But you know the worst thing about that, I remember that incident. One of the worst things for me was that they immediately went and spoke to whoever had hosted him for a meal.
Yeah. And I can tell you who that was.
And tried to blame them.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, he'd been drinking way before he got to his home.
Oh, yeah. And they actually tried to shut up. Yeah. And Coventry hierarchy tried to shut up the young brother when he was from Ireland.
Sounds like Coventry hierarchy to me.
Yeah, that was the old one that you didn't even get to meet, Abby.
Mate, what's worse, the old one or the new one? I think it's debatable.
Same monkeys in a different cage.
So, Ross, you started by saying this subject was very personal to you. So, what was your experiences of alcohol when you were in the Brethren?
Yeah, so again, I would have probably had my first drink around about 12 years of age, usually martini with some lemonade.
Is that other than port at the supper? I presume that is.
Yeah, other than port at the supper. But it wasn't until I got to about 16 that it started to become a real problem. When I was 16, I used to go out to work with another brother, and he liked his drink, and he used to actually drink on the job. So obviously I used to have like 2 or 3 strong beers during the day when I was at work with him. And I found that unfortunately, once I started, I couldn't actually stop. And at first, 2 or 3 strong beers was enough for me to like feel the effects and all the rest of it. But it got that I just had to start having more and more and more to get the same effect.
Is that a known fact with alcohol, though, that we all drink because we enjoy a drink and it can relax you and so on, but then your body, is it right? Your body gets, I know you've looked into this, Ross, gets more used to it, so you tend to increase the quantity to get that effect, like any drug. Definitely
with addiction, you do need more and more and more to get the same effect. And also to try and get an extra high, really, I suppose, is one way of putting it. And I mean, that carried on for the next 20 years. And it got to the point in the end, I think we were talking about this last night, Jackie, it got to the point in the end where I would drink in one sitting a whole 70 centilitre bottle of whiskey. And sometimes even that wasn't enough. I had to top it up with whatever was in the house, getting to the point where, I look back and laugh now. I used to fill the bottles up with water so that my dad wouldn't notice, the alcohol had gone. But that's how bad it got with me. So, it's a subject that's very personal to me because obviously I struggled big time with it whilst in there.
Yeah. And knowing that alcohol is so prevalent in the Brethren, we're speculating now, all of us, from our knowledge of those inside. How many people inside do you think could be in the position that you found yourself in at that stage, Ross, where a bottle of scotch disappears?
I would think that there's a lot. I mean, obviously I went to the Priory to get myself sorted out, and in the group therapy I was in, there were 6 of us, and 4 of those were brethren.
Oh, wow.
And then they have aftercare meetings there as well. So, like, once you've been through the addiction treatment program, you can go back every week and just share how your week's been, how you're getting on, etc., etc. And there'd probably be 20 people in the room, and probably about 15 of those would be brethren.
Oh my goodness. Was that awkward though? Because you would know who the other brethren were, or?
Yeah, in one sense it was awkward, but then in the other way, it made you realise that, yeah, there are other people that are struggling with the same problems I'm struggling with.
I think it'd be more awkward for the other 5.
Yeah, definitely. And, I often thought in those aftercare meetings, what sort of message is this giving out to people?
I was going to ask that. Did it not, for the priory even, was there not questions asked?
I never heard any of the therapists actually question it, but, it must have, I mean, it's human nature. It must have gone through their mind, why are there so many people coming through? And I think I know another person we've had on the podcast went to the Roehampton Priory, but the Bristol Priory that I went to was the main one. So that's where all the PBs funneled through, really.
There's a cynic in me, Anne, that says if these priories are privately run, there's an income stream, and that's the cynic in me.
No, I was going to say the same thing, and also
it's a good revenue stream.
The question and wondering that in my mind.
Yeah, and in a sense, professionally speaking, it's very difficult for therapists or people in that position to tie it to the church. I mean, because that's almost stepping outside their professional boundaries, because they're there to treat the patient. So I kind of get that. Even though in their heads they might think, goodness me, there's, so many of these people from this small group that are coming in with issues, whether they're alcohol or mental health, or it's quite hard for them to take that wider, particularly without breaking patient confidentiality and all that kind of thing. So they are in a difficult position.
So I think that there were certain psychiatrists and psychologists. I saw one, Dr. Blacker. At Priory.
So you saw, wasn't it?
Something weird with him. Like, didn't he die or something?
I don't know. He retired before just after I.
There was another psychiatrist that took his own life that had treated brethren, not Dr. Blacker.
No, Dr. was actually really decent. He was the one that actually got me out of the brethren.
Really? Okay. Well, I had a completely different experience because. I felt like the whole thing was completely scripted.
But going back to the revenue stream, a 4-week the addiction treatment program is 4 weeks, and they charge £14,500 for that. So, they're making a mint out of the brethren.
15 brethren doing that. Yeah, my mental maths isn't great, but it's not a small sum. So, Ross, out of interest, you were in the brethren at the time when you had the therapy.
Yeah.
What was? Because I think there are brethren in there who maybe know they've got a problem but aren't at the stage of admitting it, or maybe it's too difficult. But what was that trigger point for you to realise that actually I've got to do something about this? I can't carry on drinking the way I am.
What's your step 1, Ross?
So the trigger point for me, I suppose, really was that I got to the point where I was just tired of it, really. And the brother I was working for, his father had seen Dr. Blacker, and he actually encouraged me to go and see Dr. Blacker, and I got on so well that I thought, right, I will actually do this. And to be honest, it's the best thing I ever did. But talking about, I think it is difficult if you're an addict in the brethren if you're in that environment, it's really hard to not succumb to it again.
Yeah. So you don't drink at all now, do you, Ross? Is that correct? No. So did you ever get to that stage in the Brethren where you just didn't drink? And if you did, how difficult was that?
So while I was in Bristol, and because I stayed on in Bristol for about 5 or 6 months after I was in the Priory, and in that time I was clean because I was going to regular aftercare meetings at the Priory and also to AA meetings in Bristol. But then I moved back to Swaffham and I was forbidden to go to AA meetings because it was described as a rival fellowship. And
like a fellowship in a fellowship, isn't it? So, yeah, anyway.
And consequently, I had a relapse.
Right.
Because there was just that pressure to drink. I hadn't got the support. I relapsed.
Yeah.
And then I went into the Priory again. And it was then they said to me, look, if you don't get out of that religion, you are going to end up dead. And you know, that made me sit up and think, because there was a sister local to us that died of alcoholism, and she would have only been in her 40s. So, yeah. So that's when I actually probably, when I came back out of the Priory, I didn't drink after that. But then I was actually, I was going down to AA meetings in London, so I had the support there.
Yeah, a network. Because I think that's one thing I think must be really difficult with alcohol being so prevalent, particularly in the breaks, and you know, it's if you became teetotal because you're in recovery and because of the addiction, you just do not want to touch alcohol. Because I think I'm right in saying, Ross, that often if you've been in that situation, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have one drink, it's not very long then before you're back on, you know, the slope of needing more and more.
Yeah, and it's like once I started, I couldn't stop. So I couldn't even, you know, if I had one drink, it wouldn't stop at the one.
Yeah,
but sobriety is 0 drinks, not just the one.
Yeah, 0. It's not just the occasion.
0.
So if you had to get to that stage in the Brethren because of the addiction to alcohol, how difficult do you think, those of you who have left way more recently than me, it would be? Because alcohol's so prevalent in people. So, I mean, would there be much sympathy if you knew you were having somebody coming round to your house that was teetotal for their health and their well-being? How sympathetic would you be to that? I suppose it's an individual.
No one would care.
Maybe more than others.
But yeah, I was going to say, I think it must be down to individuals.
Yeah.
Just as you said that, I do remember there's a certain person who was like serious alcoholic. And you know, it was just standard that you did not serve drinks in the house when you had that person.
So they didn't at all. That's actually very sympathetic. I'm pleased to hear that.
I don't know if that was just, you know, more of a certain area, if you like. This would have been when I was back in Ireland.
Yeah.
You know, in latter years.
There were households, though, weren't there, where like they'd obviously had a serious problem.
And it wasn't served.
The local Brethren had imposed essentially, you know, a ban on that house. And if you went to that house, because I can remember going to a weekend fellowship meeting, and we went to a certain person's house, and where we were staying said to us, "Oh, by the way, you know, there's no alcohol in that house, so don't ask for any." And we had a household locally that was like that for a number of years. They relaxed it a number of years later, but so there were cases where people would essentially be. I don't know what level it had to get to before it got to that point.
Although
my household,
there was still a stigma attached to you.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we had a brother local in Kings Lynn that had a very big alcohol problem, and if you went to his house, you wouldn't have alcohol at all. It wasn't served, and consequently, if he was allocated to your house, you would be expected not to serve alcohol.
My household growing up was one of the embarrassing ones that wouldn't serve alcohol or have alcohol. I remember one particular fellowship meeting, we had a French family come and stay with us, and they brought the most beautiful red wine. And Stephen and Liz Knight, who are like the alcoholic celebrity couple from Manchester, were staying and helping, and they like quickly snaffled the alcohol out. But the shame and the bullying and the embarrassment of not having alcohol in the house, like even I'd have been my teens, even I felt that pressure. I wouldn't have even drank myself. Yet I still felt the pressure. I think someone spiked my dad's drink once. I remember when it happened. There's a certain family that seemed to have it in for him, and they spiked his drink out of spite. So that happens too.
But almost as a joke, which is not a joke at all.
No, it's not. It's someone's whole livelihood, actually. Like, do these people know how hard it is to stay sober?
Yeah. It's not a joke.
Especially in there when you've literally got alcohol rubbed in your face. Day in, day out. I mean, like, I remember going to workplaces, and in the morning, like, you'd just walk past a brother, and like the waft of alcohol from like the night before would hit you in the face. Like, even that, if I was an alcoholic, could trigger me straight back into living my sobriety. It's everywhere you look. Even in business premises now, they've got an alcohol fridge. They've got a bar area, because obviously they're flying with the elites, so to speak, in businesses now.
And we know from recent things that have been leaked to us from insiders for example, at what's now infamously called the Palmy Party. Alcohol is served up was it in the car park, in the marquee, in the foyer? And then I understand it was also served up at a recent business conference up in Birmingham recently. It was there on tap, and phenomenal sums of money is spent on it, which is another thing. I've heard that, it has to be a certain brand of alcohol, which is obviously not the cheapest brand. And I can imagine that puts people under strain. They feel obliged to buy the best.
Absolutely. As a householder, when we were in there, our alcohol bill was crippling. If we were entertaining, we wouldn't spend under £200 on one day's alcohol.
And I suppose it's even more expensive now because I meant to get it from Campus & Co.
Yes. Yeah. No, buy one, get one free there. I don't know. I've never been in a shop. I'd like to go in and see.
Would you really?
Yes.
Would you?
I would.
Oh, mate.
I avoided the quite clear the shops are for community only. So.
No, there's definitely a sign up saying that.
Sorry, it's a bit of a side, but is that actually legal to do that? Is there any?
I don't think there's an issue with it because it's a privately owned. I'm not actually sure, but I think if it's a private, I mean,
it could be classed as discrimination. That's all.
Well, it is, but should we take issue with it, Anne? See how far.
Do you know what they said though? They said that non-brethren people will be knocking on the doors of Campus & Co's near the end.
Okay, maybe let's not give them that satisfaction then, Abby.
It's the end. When's the end?
I'd rather starve.
They've been talking about the end for a long time.
I know. Where is this end? I wish it. I mean, I actually believed in it fully, and I still do now a little bit.
It took me about 4 or 5 years to actually, even in my subconscious, it was there. Because I used to see them, like if I was out for a walk or something on a Sunday, and one of their cars would pass, and I could feel myself relax and go, "Oh, it didn't happen."
It's not this week then.
But that was like but probably about 4 years after I left.
Yeah.
Even though I
when it's
was
gonna
telling
come.
myself it's not true.
I think
Still,
you have
It
to
comes as
remember
a thief in the night. Like, why on a Sunday morning? It comes as a thief in the night, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
And anyway, how are they going to
that's
do
another
it from a
podcast,
supper in
that is.
Australia to a supper here to a supper in America, all at the same
Oh,
time?
you just need
It's
faith.
it's part of the mystery, Abby.
So
Yeah.
I personally still believe in the rapture, but not in the way that they see it.
Not the way, no. And not
2012
exclusively for them, if you believe in it. The other thing I was interested in, because I think was the drink driving issue. Now, I know over the years the attitude in the world to drink driving has changed. So my judgment of how the brethren were when I was in is probably not a fair one, because society's attitude has changed sort of from those days. And certainly now, you know, the messages have come through in society so loud and clear: you don't drink and drive. And I think in some countries, isn't it in Scandinavian countries, it's actually 0 alcohol in the blood if you're driving. We're not quite there in the UK. And that message has come through so loud and clear to society as a whole that I think we're all very conscious of it. So my question to people that left way more recently than me, which is all 4 of you, has the attitude amongst the brethren changed? Has that message got through within their community?
Definitely not. It's horrifying how much.
It is, but there would be sort of times when there was a sort of clamping down, maybe, but it very quickly went back, because these people are dependent on alcohol. All of them.
Yeah, so we've had information from an insider, or I digress. It's actually somebody that left recently that has told us that breathalyzers are quite commonly used within the I'll say the name, within the Hales household, and also within other households, and whoever is under the limit is the one that drives.
Yeah,
they were actually an initiative at one time.
Yeah, didn't they sell them at one time through UBT?
They were definitely.
You could buy them.
It would have been. You would have remembered that, Gilly. No, maybe it was just in Ireland where the
no, they definitely did. They definitely did. They were.
There was definitely a UBT initiative thing.
Yeah, they were sold for trading. Like a trading initiative. But just to answer you, just come back to your question, Jackie.
Yeah.
Granted, I'm 10 years out of date, but it just comes back to what I was saying earlier about, in an attempt to be seen as cool. There's one incident that sticks particularly in my head, and I can remember we had a young couple who had a child, at least one child, if not two, and he asked, before the meal, you ask them if you want a drink. He asked for a whiskey, and I gave him, what I now know to be. I mean, it would have been a quadruple at least, if not more, measure of whiskey, and he drank that. And I did a second round of drinks in the living room before the meal, and he had the same again. Then at the dinner table, he had a full glass of wine, and then a beer. And bearing in mind the dinner times on a Sunday are very compressed because of the times you've got between the meetings, he proceeded, having drunk those, so he had 2 big whiskies, and I mean big, a glass of wine and a beer, and then proceeded to drive away from our house with a wife and a young child in the car.
Wow.
So, he would have been...
And if you'd been in a pub,
two or three.
Yeah. And if you'd been in a pub, somebody hopefully would have taken his keys away from him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if we'd taken up that scheme of reporting them to the police once they'd left the house, we would have had a field day.
The sad thing is about that, because again, the same family member, who drunk a lot. When they got caught, because he did get caught, they paid backhanders to get free, so they could continue to drive. And that happens. That was in my own family. That happened.
And I've heard
they were money talks.
Yeah.
There you go, and they used that a lot. He never lost his license, not while I was in, anyway. I remember it, just little story, but I remember him saying to me after I left, and I was going on my first holiday to Morocco, and he was saying how dangerous it was to go to a godless country, as they called it. And I said, do you know what is dangerous? Is the amount of times that you got in your car from our house and drove 6 miles with 3 little children in the car. That's dangerous. And I don't think they even realise how dangerous it is. And then these things happen.
Do you think that I think the brethren, because of the way, and I'm generalising now, because of the way, the environment they've been in, they have a superiority complex. They have a complex that says we're special and we're looked after. Do you think that comes into play? It won't happen to me. Do you think that kind of feeling is accentuated in there?
Absolutely, because they say that the assembly is the highest court.
Yeah.
So the court of law in England, I mean, they're above it. And they say that the angels are watching you if you pray to the Holy Spirit when you get in the car. So they think they're above all that. And then these horrific accidents happen where people are killed. I mean, you don't ever just hear of someone like just scraping their car because they're drunk. Like, it's always catastrophic because of the amount of alcohol that they've consumed. I mean, even I myself, like, it was normal for a woman on a Lord's Day dinner to have, say, for a sister, like a glass of port pre-dinner, and then at the table you'd have a glass of wine or two. Like, even that immediately is over the limit, considering their drinks aren't measured. They're just sloshed in a glass with a couple of ice cubes. That's already over the limit. And that, for me, wasn't, like, in terms of sisters, that wasn't a lot. Like, there was sisters that would drink, 2 glasses of cognac and then 2 wines. But I still drank. I still drove when I was over the drink drive limit. And that was because the person that I'd have been with had drank less. So it's always who's drank less want to drive. But actually you're both over the limit.
Yeah.
Like, for a brother on a Lord's Day dinner, don't forget, he's already had a good skinful of port at the supper. And then Lord's Day dinner, pre-dinner, he'd have, like, I'm taking the average brother, like 3 glasses of cognac, which again isn't measured. It's just cognac in a glass with a couple of ice. And this is starting from like age 18. And then they'd have a couple of glasses of wine at the table. And then a lot of the brothers you'd see jump in their VW caravels with it full of children and family, and off they'd go to the 315.
And we know, don't we, that there's been some tragic accidents in recent times, hasn't there? There's been that horrendous one in New Zealand where sadly a sister and her daughter died when her husband was driving. And then there was one recently this year, wasn't it, earlier this year in Australia, where a young lad was driving and he survived, but 2 of his passengers didn't. And you wonder what I find myself wondering, firstly, I think I feel desperately sorry for the young people trapped in there, because I think they don't know an awful lot different. I mean, the people in that young accident in Australia are similar ages to my own children. My own children are absolutely, they just know you don't drink and drive. That's it. You just don't do it. And yet I feel, and I might be wrong here, that people of that generation, probably your age group, Abby, within the Brethren, haven't had that message quite the same.
No, not at all.
For some reason, it's acceptable. And then because it's acceptable, these horrendous things happen.
Well, I believe it's learned behaviour. They've watched the people around them do it. So why
that's what they've seen as they're growing up. That's maybe what their parents did, what their friends' parents did. Had a couple of, as you said, Gilly, a few scotches and then get in the car and drive with the children in the car. So that's what they've witnessed. So even though a lot of people say, oh, that's horrendous, they should know better, sometimes I wonder if they do. And therein lies the tragedy. They don't know any better. It's not excusing it, but it's perhaps trying to understand why this happens.
But then when the person is facing conviction, they're just dropped.
That was going to be my question. How do the brethren explain that? How would they handle or cope with somebody who's obviously been drink driving and it's been convicted in the courts and there was a tragic consequence of that? What then happens to that person?
Well, there's one case that I know of in a lad in Hereford. I think there was a newspaper article on it. I don't need to mention his name. That's probably not fair on the lad. But the mother had alcohol issues. So he'd have learnt the behaviour from her. And he was travelling home from a night with brethren, I presume, because that's all they're allowed to do. And he jumped a red light and squashed a lady and her dog in between his car and the wall, and he ran off the scene, which seems to be actually quite a pattern in the brethren. Run away from whatever you've just done so you don't have to admit to it. And he was withdrawn from upon conviction. I don't know if he's back now. I don't know what sentencing he got, but he was just dropped.
The sad thing about it all is that these people are victims of a system.
Absolutely.
And that was young.
They're conditioned from so young to act in this way that they don't know any different.
And he just thought he'd be being cool, I imagine.
He might not even thought about it, because so often we don't even think about it. It's just, I've always got in the car and driven with drink and I've never been caught or nothing's ever happened till now. And then these sad situations.
They are sad. Sorry, Gilly, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say the sad thing is on all of these cases is that the hierarchy will point to that person and say it was an individual, it was that individual that made that choice, that made that decision to get in the car with drink and all the rest of it, without accepting the responsibility that, like we've been saying, it's a learnt behaviour. It's a culture they've grown up in and not known anything else. So, and just to come back to your question about how how they react, and like Abby's mentioned about them being dropped, I don't know if some of you remember the case in Nottingham that was probably late 2000s, where he somebody from the Peebs had a road traffic accident and that tragically killed someone. But
tractor or something.
No, it was a different. He was in the middle of restoring a house, and the new house. The alarm went off at the new house. He was at home. He'd had a couple of drinks. He drove to the new house because the alarm had gone off, and on the way hit someone head on, and tragically they died. But just to come back to your point about how they view it, it was, we were getting emails every week with updates about how the court case was proceeding, praying that it that you wouldn't end up with a custodial sentence and all the rest of it, and it was almost like this whole thing of we were praying that he wouldn't be punished. Well, this is the law of the land. This is what happens when you kill someone. But then when he was eventually convicted and did jail time. But again, like Abby said, he was dropped. His wife wasn't allowed to go and see him. He was withdrawn from.
That's what's so wrong at that point. I mean, again, I'm not condoning what people do, because the sort of bottom line is don't drink and drive. But it's happened, and a tragedy has happened. But where is the opportunity for that person to have support to make amends? I mean, if you're completely dropped by your community and by your family because of the result of a custodial sentence, to me, that would make me spiral further down into a slough of depression and drinking
addiction.
Opportunity. Yeah, addiction, because there's nothing left for you.
And the sad thing in that case as well is that when he was in prison, another brother went to see him, and that brother was then consequently withdrawn from himself because of his other brother in prison. So, somebody was giving him a bit of support, and it ended up in them being withdrawn from as well.
But yeah,
they'll go and support convicted paedophiles and go and have meetings with them in prison.
Maybe if they're put in jail, but if they're not put in jail, they will.
No,
people when they're in jail.
Yes, in jail. They'll go to speak to them in jail. You just think,
it's bizarre, isn't it? And I suppose that's what's really, really sad, is there's been some absolute tragedies as a result of drink driving. And I think I would say to anybody inside who listens to this, drink driving is an issue. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. Simple as that. Because you only have to look at just the, tragic accidents that have happened to realise the potential consequences of it. And prevention's better than sorting it out afterwards. Just don't do it. But that may be a long time. That message gets through.
Drink driving is one thing, but and then think of the tragedies just from alcoholism.
Yeah, I was going to say,
that again, these people, are victims, and that's where's the responsibility?
So it sort of leads on to the thought process. Why is there such a culture of drinking amongst the brethren? Where did that come from, and why is it there?
I believe it came from the top.
I mean,
I don't disagree, Abby.
Didn't it come in JT Junior's time that he was an alcoholic, wasn't he? And that was certainly...
Yeah, but the brethren don't think that.
Oh, I know that, but I mean, that was obvious.
He was a pure man, wasn't he?
The fact that he's some relation, quite close relation of mine, it certainly was not talked about that he was an alcoholic. But I mean, we've learned that since. You only have to go back and listen to his ramblings to know that. But when
when they were doing all the recordings on Friday nights, they literally they sent all of the brethren the recordings of Aberdeen. And we sat in the lounge
with the drunk language in it.
Yeah, and we were like, what a privilege it is to listen to this. And even
quite good entertainment, Abby, for a Friday night.
Oh, right. And then Bruce was like, turn this off. I can't even understand what he's saying. But now
because he was so drunk.
But then the brethren put a slant on it that it's just a test for the brethren to see if they thought that or not. And you just think, I was sucked in by that. What a fool.
I mean, it does seem to be, obviously it's before any of our time, but it does seem to me that the era of JT Junior did seem to change, because prior to that, I mean, Andrew's a bit older than me, and he can remember prior to JT Junior as a kid, and he said alcohol was not prevalent amongst the brethren. You'd have a sherry with your Sunday roast. He said partly it was possibly societal, in that people didn't have the money to buy expensive bottles of booze anyway, but it wasn't that the brethren were ever teetotal. It's just that alcohol wasn't an issue. And then it sort of seemed to sneak in, didn't it? I can remember, I mean, my year in the brethren was JHS's era, and I can remember Scotch being very prevalent.
Very.
I mean, it was,
because it was his favourite drink.
that brings me on to something. We basically J.H. Symington actually made a remark in one of their church meetings once, and he actually said, I've got it word for word here. He said, we've all been given to drink of one spirit. What do you drink? One spirit, red label. Well, I mean spirits. What's wrong with that? So he's actually,
it's blasphemy, really, isn't it?
Well, it is really. Yes, he's taking the influence of the Holy Spirit as a red label spirit, isn't he? And
But I can imagine the whole room laughing at that, because that's the kind of weird sense of humour that they've got.
Or taking it as an instruction.
A lot, and also a lot of the ministry around that time used to get edited quite heavily. But that apparently that remark went unedited in the ministry. So,
But, I mean, it was JT.
Sorry, Gally.
No, I was just going to say, just coming back to your point, wasn't it JT Junior's time that, I mean, I can remember being told my dad's generation that it was expected that they would just, if you went to someone's house for a break, they'd just bring around a tray of whiskers.
Yes.
And adults and kids would be expected to partake of it all the same.
Yeah. So I remember actually slightly different scenario, but a lot that there was in a dinner break, there was a lot of drinking going on, and there was a little child of about 2 toddling around the room who just went to every person and they give them a bit of their drink. That child ended up having its stomach pumped out.
How did social services not get involved in that?
Nobody told them, Abby?
And also,
if you go and have a stomach pump,
in fairness, I think if that happened now, the hospital would report.
Quite a few years ago.
A few years back, it wouldn't have happened. The awareness of these issues. I mean, now if you take your child to the hospital with a bump on their head, you have to explain it away, which is not unreasonable, but I think going back to the time you were talking about, Anne, it wouldn't have been quite, you take your child to A&E to have their stomach pumped, it wouldn't have been picked up in the same way, would it, as a safeguarding issue or anything like that, like it would do now.
No, I can confirm what you said, Gilly, about a tray of scotch being handed around. Because my mum, she was at some 3-day meetings, and she was at a house, and they were handing this tray of scotch around, and she refused to have a glass, and she was looked down upon terribly because of that. It was sort of like, well, what's the matter with you, sort of thing, what's wrong with you?
And it's that sort of despisal or whatever you want to call it. That still goes on today. I can remember going to someone's house, and if it was a hot summer's day and you just really fancied like a pint of Coke, like you say, oh, can I have a pint of Coke, please? Straight away, it's like, yeah, okay, what do you want in it?
Yes.
And if you some Bacardi to water it down.
Yeah, and if you were a married woman, the first question was, "Are you pregnant?"
Well, that happened to me, Anne. That is how my pregnancy got discovered.
Yeah.
Because I didn't ask for an alcoholic drink; I asked for water.
Not long before I left, I stopped drinking for about a year. Actually, that was what sort of woke me up a bit as well, was like sitting in the room with all these people saying one thing in the meeting, and then we'd sit around, just talking absolute rubbish and pulling people to shreds. But yeah, every time I said I didn't want to drink, it was, oh, you're pregnant.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because alcohol, it's known, is a depressant in that it gives you that high, but then obviously when the alcohol leaves your system, you can hit quite a low. We also know that there's quite a high use of antidepressants in the Brethren. So you wonder how that mixes, and you wonder why people feel the need to drink. I mean, I thought maybe we could sort of speculate on that a little bit. What is it? We all like a glass of wine. I certainly do. But then there's having a drink socially, having a drink to enjoy it. There's alcohol dependency, and there's outright alcoholism, isn't there? What makes that culture they're in make them be so dependent on alcohol, do you think?
Well, I wrote down a couple of things. I think you've got massive amounts of peer pressure, like more than anyone outside the brethren would ever begin to even believe. And you've got the amount of emotional pain that these people are in. You've got traumas that have not been identified or dealt with. You've got your basic needs not being identified. And in something that I wrote earlier, I'd recommend looking up the Maslow pyramid, which
the hierarchy of needs. Yeah,
that's it. So you can identify your needs. If you're in there and you're suffering with addiction of any kind, then look that up and you'll be able to see which of your needs aren't being met, which will probably be all of them if you're an addict.
We'll put a link to the Maslow hierarchy of needs on the end of the podcast, I think, so if anyone does want to have a look at it.
You've got no professional mental health help really, unless it's been vetted by someone like a priest or something. There's not really any of that. I mean, back when I was a child, the help that they tried, I mean, I was failed by the locality that I was brought up in. Totally and utterly failed. Like, they have got a lot to answer for. Whether they ever will, I don't know. But the priestly care, there was two brothers in charge of. Sorry, I'm digressing. I usually do. But there was two brothers in charge of my parents, so to speak. And these people, they had absolutely no qualifications, and they're trying to deal with intensely traumatized individuals. My dad, who came in from outside with addiction, with previous addiction issues, which were only amplified by living within the brethren. And then you've got my mum, who also came from very strange, weird background, still of which I don't know a lot about, and I don't frankly care. But you had these priests trying to help them and keep them together, because that was their ultimate goal, was to keep the couple together. And they've got no idea. I mean, it's when, as a priest, you signpost them to professional bodies.
That was going to be my question, actually. If you've got two priests visiting somebody that has an alcohol problem, how much do they know about it? How much would they?
I mean, the ones that were serving my family knew nothing. I mean, Ian Pavey was one of the guys, and he was one of them that I'd say probably tried his best. I mean, he was still bloody clueless, but he tried his best. But he had to look up what Alcoholics Anonymous was. I mean, unless you've worked a program, you don't really know what it's all about.
No, and also, again, we've heard from a recent leaver that that they do have. It sounds like they have some sort of alcohol program within the Brethren. And they actually use priestly visits as part of the program, and they'll present that legally as counselling, when obviously they've got no training whatsoever. And then when they do come round to visit the person that's got the issue with alcohol, they'll sit there and when they do their counselling, and they'll drink they'll drink spirits in front of the person that they're trying to help.
As a test.
Yeah.
It's not really a laughing matter, but do you think that the Brethren, I mean, some of them must know there's a problem there. Do you think that they ever have tried to set up self-help groups?
Yes, they definitely have. My mum was part of one, and sisters in my locality were, but it was shut down after Bruce Hales said it was a fellowship within a fellowship.
And we do actually have a screenshot of the messages when it was shut down, which we can include in the podcast if needs be.
Yeah, and this was a group of sisters that they acknowledged that they have a problem. They'd admitted to themselves. Is that correct?
No, this was families of support of families of alcoholics. It's called Courage to Change. So that's an Al-Anon book.
Yeah. This is a screenshot from the WhatsApp Courage to Change group. Amongst multiple messages, the main message is, "Good day, everyone. We've had word from Australia about the group chat. Message from Australia. To be clear, we are not unsympathetic with these difficult situations, but this is not the way to handle it. By group chat, as this has the potential to become a fellowship within a fellowship. Each local place needs to provide the support needed."
And that comes from the Serenity Prayer, which Bruce Hales actually has said about has mentioned at church. Actually, he's read out the Serenity Prayer and referred to his brother Stephen and how amazing the Serenity Prayer is. So he should probably use it a little bit more.
Yeah. So is it not common knowledge that Bruce Hales has a brother that's got amongst the brethren?
Yes. I mean, probably more so for me because I lived in Sydney, so I was more aware of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just his brother. I'd say there's a lot of his family who have problems with alcohol addiction.
Yeah.
I think his sister, she died from alcoholism.
Yeah, I understood that. Yes, as well. I'd heard that. So,
which you'd think would wake him up, wouldn't you? But no, he still sits there in his palatial lounge on Zoom with a drink of whatever, ice cubes clinking in his cup, and you just think you really are a dickhead, aren't you? Like, look, people's lives are literally being destroyed from addiction. You can just sit there and gloat, whereas actually he's a border. I mean, I don't actually know if he's an addict, but he's got to be fairly near the line. He's got to be dependent, if not addicted.
My mum actually got drunk in Bruce Hales' house in 2012.
I don't think that's a rarity.
There was the blues was flowing. One of the
obviously it makes a strong man stronger and a weak man weaker. So that's why
to do to women. Then did you have a comment? And the
I don't know, but going by JT Junior, that's what it does to you.
Yeah. So one of the things I've often wondered, I mean, alcohol is used, as we know, it's used for emotional support. It's used because you're feeling down. It can be used for many, many reasons. It can be used because your body physically needs it. But I've often wondered whether the drinking is quite prevalent, quite apart from the culture, which we've established is there right from a young age that they're brought up in, but whether it's particularly prevalent because there's so much lack of freedom in there, because people can't be themselves. I mean, Ross, you're probably best able to comment on this one, because obviously being gay in the Brethren was not allowed, so you could never be who you really were in there. But even apart from that, you can't be who you really want to be in there because you don't get a chance to find out who you are. And whether that could account for part of the...
That was precisely why I did drink. As I said before, I couldn't just have one drink and leave it at that. But it was to numb the pain and trying to be somebody, trying to live two lives, basically. I used it as a numbing agent.
Yeah. I think so many of them do.
Yeah, it's a numbing agent, emotionally numbing.
Yeah.
And I think also, we haven't really touched on this, but we know that the Brethren lifestyle is quite hectic and they work very long days and they have meetings and there's no free time. And I imagine, well, it was in my day, and I don't think it's got any better since, that you're just exhausted. And again, alcohol can be used when you're absolutely exhausted, can't it? It's a sort of, it will get me through. I mean, I know
people that have what they call a nightcap.
Yeah.
It wasn't a fucking nightcap. It was a good stonking stiff drink.
Yeah.
So that they could go to sleep because they just couldn't switch off.
Yeah. I mean, I know of one insider who has openly admitted they can't go to a meeting without having a hefty drink before because it steadies their nerves. And I think that's absolutely tragic. I understand it. I totally understand it. And there was also, the story of somebody who wasn't going to meetings, hadn't been for a few weeks, and he got a knock on the door at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning and was told, come with, it was by one of his priests, come with me, we'll go and have a McDonald's breakfast, and I've got some booze in the car, and you can have a drink so that when you arrive at the meeting, nobody will notice you walk in. And this person had the strength of character to say, I don't drink at 9 o'clock in the morning. But I thought that said so much to me. It said, so we'll get this person so drunk they can walk into the meeting without worrying about it, because then they won't worry about the stigma of it, about going back to the meeting when you haven't been for several weeks. I was absolutely gobsmacked by that. Absolutely gobsmacked. And the fact that was seen as the answer to that person's problems, to get them back to meeting. And that wasn't about saving their soul. That was about saving face. That was about, somebody going to the meeting.
Yeah. And bribery is one of the priest's tools, especially with addicts, actually. We'll give you this new job if you stay sober. We'll give you this if you stay sober. We'll pay for your treatment if you stay sober.
I was going to say that if it's not alcohol that's the answer, it's money. They'll either use money or alcohol.
Or a lot of them. I mean, we're talking about alcohol in particular, but I would say that 70% of men have work addictions. I mean, they are addicted. They're all addicted to something. If it's not alcohol, it's work.
But there's nothing else for them in life.
There isn't.
There's been a lot of talk about the role of women in the Brethren, and I know our friends in Canada have discussed that at some length, and I'm in total agreement with what they said. But actually, for the guys, the onus is on them to earn a fortune, to build up a business, and to work 12-hour days, and then go to meetings. There's nothing else for them in life, is there?
You're not allowed hobbies, which goes back to that to the Maslow pyramid of so you've got your physiological needs, your safety and your security, your love and belonging, your esteem, and then your self-fulfillment, which is where things like hobbies come in. I mean, you're not allowed to go golfing, you're not allowed to do, you name me a man that had a hobby in there.
Well, you weren't allowed to, were you?
I can tell you. Sorry, Gilly.
No, I was just going to say anything that you did outside of their interests would have been seen as was something that could come between you and God. So
exactly that.
I
have an ex-Brethren friend who was very fond of boats and owned a boat and was told he had to get rid of the boats. He's no longer in the Brethren and he still has his boat.
Yes, love that.
So,
I know we're talking about alcoholism, but I think also with the men, the whole system can lead on to sexual addiction as well.
Yeah, that was my primary addiction.
Yeah, but I do feel that the sexual addiction is quite a thing in there, because it's sort of, for men, that's something that that's their hobby, maybe. you know.
But there's no education
I'm not saying
about
it's not everybody. I'm not saying there's label on everybody, but I think, again, these people are victims.
Yeah, and there's no education about it, though, is there, Anne? There's no, for the guys, there's no education about what's happening to their bodies. Same with women, but what's happening to their bodies as they grow up. Everything is perceived as wicked. Everything that is happening naturally to their bodies as they go through puberty is wicked. So it's going to, and I think that's why we end up with the, child sex abuse problems we've got, because there's no education, there's no knowledge, there's no outlet for it that is acceptable.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not even just not the knowledge, it's the whole being forced to stifle any of those feelings.
Yes, exactly. There's no, it's quite normal for people going through their teens to have boyfriends, girlfriends, and so on.
Here it is, not in there.
Not in there, it isn't. No, but that's the normal way of discovering about yourself, of discovering what type of person you get on with, of discovering your sexuality, all these things. And all of that is denied. So
it's not even mentioned.
Some people will manage that, and some people will go perverted with it.
Yeah, and and it can, again, it could lead to alcoholism or whatever.
Yeah.
I think we've said it a few times about discovering who you are as a person. I don't know one person in there that actually knows who they are as a person, because everything has been dictated to them. Yeah, and decisions have always been made, spoon-fed to them. So actually, they don't know who they are. So maybe they're drowning themselves in addiction because they don't actually know who they are as a person. Yeah. So I'll just drown myself instead. Yeah, but they might even not be doing that consciously. Yeah, I mean, I think finding out about yourself as a person is actually a lifelong process. I don't think it ever stops. But in the Brethren, you don't even get started, do you? So, you know, you're not even allowed to find out what kind of work you're good at, because your works dictate what suits you. Do you like working outdoors? Do you like working in an office? Do you like healthcare profession? There's none of that normal exploration of finding out, which then would, if you're able to do that, Abby, that would then come back to fulfilling those hierarchy of needs that Maslow talks about bit by bit, wouldn't it? Because you're fulfilling your own. And then with those sort of finding niches in life that are suited to you, with that comes your self-esteem and your feeling of self-worth and significance, which are all parts of our natural human needs. You don't have any of that in there, do you? I didn't anyway. No. I don't know. I mean, it's actually self-esteem is not allowed. From a very early age, you're taught to look in the mirror and quote Romans 7 verse.
"Oh, wretched man that I am."
3. That's it.
That's it. See, I still remember
me out this body of death. And
that's how ingrained
I used to do that. Yeah. And now I would never even think of doing that. I mean, I don't have very good self-esteem anyway, but it's a lot better than it was. Yeah. But that's because of what I went through as a child. But why would you? I mean, you're assassinating yourself, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, I think self-analysis is a good thing, but actually thinking yourself as being worthless is not good. And I think...
I mean, there's in the indexes, there's 8 pages on self-judgment. Yeah. And there's not one on self-esteem.
I've forgotten about that. Self-judgment.
Yes, I remember self-judgment. Yeah, they were very strong on that, weren't they?
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, and another one
for a long time.
Yeah, another one they've got in this pyramid is friendships. Friendships, even in there, aren't allowed. No. And if you've got a really good friend, it's seen as a special friendship. And Bruce Hales has, said about it being Midianite-ish, and that they're dangerous, and that they're one of the devil's main weapons, and that you're holding up the Lord, and it can lead to corruption. And then you've got the family thing, which is also labelled as Moabitish. And then, so Bruce Hales says, let me just get the thingy up on my screen. To have just your families, just our relatives, entertaining the same people all the time, having them back, go to their place, go out with them to picnics. You'll never be sensitive about nothing, which actually is really bad grammatically. It's about anything. And one crisis after another will go past you, right over your head, and you wouldn't have a clue about what is going on in the testimony. Now,
I think that's evident. Friendships are often support a lot of the time, aren't they? I mean, you have a good time with friends, but there is support from friends. And you use the example that you said, Abby, about the group that were trying to support each other with alcoholism. And that could have worked. You could have had a certain number of people who actually managed to make some sort of progress because they all had the same problem and they were supporting each other, but that was shut down.
Do you think the reason it was shut down was that there was a loss of control there, or?
I suspect so, Anne. Yeah.
Yeah.
I suspect so, because it was
a fellowship. I mean, it's a threat. It's a direct threat to Bruce Hales' fellowship, isn't it? And that's why he shut that down far.
It didn't have to be. It didn't have to be.
Well, it's not, is it?
It's only because
isn't that how a totalitarian regime runs? I mean, if you look at any other regime we know, sort of with what Putin's doing with North Korea, if something's happening that they don't have control over, it's a threat. So you shut it down.
Yeah. What I think is disgusting about the whole thing is that the women in there don't have a voice anyway, and they find a way to communicate and support each other, and then it's shut down.
Yeah,
and I think,
on their own again.
Actually, it was critical for them because of being in such a unique. Yes, we can attend Al-Anon meetings, but having the extra pressures of being in the Brethren, which other outside Al-Anon members wouldn't necessarily understand, because the normal world isn't literally dangling a bottle of alcohol in front of your face. Having that unique perspective and a group that understands that actually is essential for them to progress.
Yeah, and having that encouragement, because I can imagine in a group, if a Brethren woman or man said, "Oh golly, I've got to have the break again this Sunday, and we've got 40 people coming to the house, and I've got to buy 6 bottles of scotch for them all to have at mid-morning on a Sunday," people's jaws would drop to the floor, because that's not that, and it's not the sort of normal. But to have a group within the Brethren supporting each other, and if then that person got through the break and didn't have a drink, and could then say in the group, "Guess what? I did it. I didn't have a drink," and everyone could say, "Well done, you. Isn't that what you need?" And they'd really understand, wouldn't they? Yeah. I mean, the other interesting thing is alcohol, as I say, there's levels of alcohol dependency, and I'd have to look it up, but that they are actually, for people that diagnose it, there are actually specified levels, and it's alcohol dependent, alcoholism, and so on. But as I understand it, one of the groups, Ross, don't they come out with some certain key questions?
Yeah, they do.
Ask yourself. And I thought might be quite good to read these out in the context of if there's an insider who's thinking, well, actually, you know what? I have got a problem and I do want some help. By starting to ask these questions could just be that turning point. And what we will do on the podcast is we will put some helplines for anybody seeking help, apart from contacting the info@GetALife email, which can then signpost you to help support groups. We'll also put some links on this podcast. But what were those questions, Ross? Because they'd be quite interesting to discuss through, won't they?
So, yeah, we picked out 3 or 4. There's quite a few questions, but they're all relevant. But these are the 4 that we thought, would be good.
So these are questions that have been written. I think there were quite a few, weren't they?
They've been written by Narcotics Anonymous.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, to us.
You can just just substitute the word drugs for alcohol. It would be exactly the same thing.
Which alcohol is actually a drug, yeah, exactly.
Well, it is a drug, yeah.
So one of them is, if somebody told you could never drink again, would that fill you with fear and dread? And also, have you ever tried to stop or control your alcohol use? And
yeah, go on.
Go on, Jackie. What were you going to
say? Thinking of that from an insider perspective, and this is speculation, total speculation. If I think of the story I was told, well, it's a true story because it was told to me directly, of the insider who couldn't go to a meeting without having a drink beforehand. I think the answer to number 1 would be true. If someone told you could never drink again, would that fill you with fear and dread? If you're drinking to get through an ordeal and you have to do that continuously, I would guess the answer to that would be yes, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and also
if you couldn't go to the meeting without drinking first.
Yeah, and like the answer to number 2 would probably be no, because have you ever tried to stop or control your alcohol use? Well, in there, you're not encouraged to do that anyway. So,
in fact, you'd be weird to do that. What's your problem?
So, to put it into context for anybody who is an outsider to the Brethren, if you go to a Brethren house for a meal or for a break, well, I think you touched on it earlier, and you just said, no, I don't want to drink. Can I have some water? Can I have a Coke or something?
Yeah.
It's a bit sort of what's wrong with you is the vibe.
Yeah, so we adapted this question slightly, but it applies. So have you ever thought that you wouldn't fit into the PBCC lifestyle or have a good time without alcohol?
I don't think the PBC lifestyle was in the original question.
No,
But it was like
it's very well adapted. It's absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
I mean, I think the original question reads something like, "Do you?" It just says, "Do you think that you wouldn't fit in or have a good time if you didn't have, without alcohol?" And then the last one we've picked out is, "Have you ever used alcohol to mask your emotions and stress?"
Oh, they're all going to be ticking yes.
Yeah. I think we need to answer these questions honestly as well.
Yeah.
I think again, if we perhaps apply that to what we've actually discussed in this podcast. So the question 3, have you ever thought you wouldn't fit into the PBC lifestyle? Or, well, I think from our discussions and from what you guys have said who have left more recent, I mean, alcohol was prevalent when I was in, but I think it's still even more so. I think it's absolutely integral to the PBC lifestyle. It's not just that you have social occasions where you drink. If they're serving alcohol at one of their fellowship meetings, as they did at the Palmy party, you can just see it is just integral with their lifestyle as much as separation is. I
was speaking to an insider this week, and he said it's got so much worse since I've left.
Wow, and that's only a year,
and that's a year.
Yeah.
Everything is tightening up. People are drinking more. Socialisation is back on the cards because obviously COVID is over. And you just think, how can it be worse than when I left? It just seems terrifying to me.
The last question, have you ever used alcohol to mask your emotions or stress? I mean, I think that's what a lot of us use alcohol for. And on the odd occasion, I don't actually see that as a problem. But if you're having to do it continually, which I think from what I hear, some of the poor insiders in the PBCC have to, it's continual. It's not a case of, this is a really bad evening, I'm going to have a drink, but then that doesn't happen for 3 weeks. It's continual. I think that's probably a fair comment from what we've discussed. There's a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that was the point of the questions, wasn't it, Ross? They are standard questions that if your answers are sort of, yes or no appropriately, then you need help.
Yeah.
And I'd like to add the first step of AA, if I may, which is we admit it, which is literally you get rid of your denial, basically. We admitted we were powerless.
We were powerless over alcohol.
We admitted that we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable.
That's right, yeah.
So if that applies to you, then
there is help. I think that is the thing. I mean, Ross, you're a testament.
But it's not in there. It's not
in there, no. But Ross is a testament to that because you went to the Alcoholic Anonymous meetings and the addiction meetings, and they've helped you, haven't they? You've kind of come out the other side on that score, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah, and to be honest, I haven't been for a while, and I've found my mental health dipping again because of that.
So, those meetings aren't just keeping sober. No. I go to Al-Anon, I go to ACA, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics, and I go to Survivors of Incest Anonymous as well. Those 12-step groups are absolutely groundbreaking. They bring out everything. And yes, they're damned hard to work. Like, boy, oh boy, those steps make me quiver. And not very much does.
To be honest, I haven't ever done the 12 steps, but I found just actually being in a meeting and being able to talk about your problems with people that have gone through exactly the same thing is, it's so cathartic. And also, it's not only that, you quite often go out for a coffee afterwards and have a good chat, and it's a circle of friends as well.
And it's talking about your problems in an environment that is safe. So if we draw the contrast, if Ross, you were talking about at the time you had the alcohol problems, if you were talking about them to two priests in the Brethren, would you have felt safe, and would you have been open and honest and transparent in the way that you probably felt, hopefully you could be, in the AA meetings?
Yeah, no, definitely not. Definitely.
Yeah, it's safe because there's no judgment. There's no repercussions for saying it as it is. And I think that's what's lacking in the Brethren, is that safe, it almost being safe to say I failed. And I don't mean in a spiritual sense. I mean, that like they do. And then, okay, that's all right. We're here to help.
Let's start again.
Yeah, we're here to help. We're not here to knock you back further.
I think another thing that's really scary is how many children there are of alcoholics.
Yes.
I mean, that's my perspective on this whole thing. I said earlier, I'm a child of an alcoholic, and I mean, most of the people that I knew then are now adult children of alcoholics, and we're damaged people. We are so damaged, and then if we don't mend from the damage caused by being in an alcoholic family, and work really hard to heal those horrific wounds, that's when the generational trauma really kicks off. And
someone needs to break the cycle, otherwise it perpetuates. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, which is what
that's happening now. It's happening now, and it's really scary because these adult children of alcoholics who haven't healed are the ones that are coming into the priestly circle and the priestly realms, and they're dealing with alcoholics and families of alcoholics, and because they've never dealt with their trauma or their upbringing or anything, they're not actually
round and round in a circle.
It is. It's a merry-go-round of craziness.
Going back to what you were saying about a safe space, Jackie, I'm racking my brains, and part of the blurb in AA is as they read out quite a lot of stuff, and one of the things they say is, whoever you see here, whatever you say here, let it stay here.
There's that confidentiality clause that's read out before every meeting, isn't there?
That's why it's called anonymous. Nothing in the Brethren is anonymous.
No
lies around.
Another thought that occurred to me was the attitude or the thought process of Brethren and drinking when you're pregnant, because generally out here it's considered not acceptable. You just does that stand in the Brethren, or?
I think it did mostly, certainly. Well, whether it was just individuals, because I just wouldn't have done it, I don't know, but
I didn't drink during my pregnancy, and I was with other mums at the time that were pregnant, and they drank. I mean, they wouldn't drink their normal amounts, but they still drank.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of the point, if you've got somebody who is either an alcoholic or a real alcohol dependent, to suddenly cut that off when you're pregnant would be very hard, if not, in a sense, detrimental. And where's the support for that? Where's if indeed that is a problem? And
I imagine it is a problem for people,
I'm trying to think of sisters who are addicts that would have been pregnant in my lifetime.
Well, I know of one person that left. I know of one person that left who has sadly since died, but they told me that their child had fetal alcohol syndrome.
Yeah, I know.
We had a sister locally that had an alcohol problem, and one of her children was born. I don't know whether it was fetal, alcohol fetal syndrome, but he was definitely born deformed. She drank.
This is what you go back to what you were saying earlier, Anne. Quite apart from it's the traumas caused, the sort of peripheral traumas caused by the drinking. Just generally, quite apart from the obvious drink driving, those peripheral traumas that come out, those knock-on effects about how, if you're in a family where there's a drink problem, it's very hard to break out of that mold. And as you say, Abby, to break that cycle is really hard. And often
it is, but I did it. And look,
you did
it's not that hard.
Yeah, but it wasn't easy. Not often in the Brethren, I imagine in the Brethren that just perpetuates. The children drink because that's what they've seen and been brought up with.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell so many stories about my husband's family, like in which they feed the kids alcohol and think it's funny. I remember Charlie was about 4 months old. Bruce's boss at the time was moving work premises, and I was tidying the showroom, and I handed my baby to one of Bruce's brothers, and he had Kestrel Super because they were moving work premises. So of course, out came the beers, whatever it is. What is a Kestrel Super?
9%.
Yeah, but what is it? A beer?
Yes, a beer. Yeah.
And I turned around and he was trying to feed it to Charlie. And I said, "What the hell are you doing? If you do that again, I will slap you in the face." Turned my back and turned straight back round, and he was doing it again. And I went over and absolutely whopped him one, took Charlie off him and walked out. And the whole family turned against me at that point for slapping him in the face. Whereas, how about actually addressing that this man had just tried to feed my little baby 9% Kestrel Super beer? That's their mentality.
Yeah.
The person in the wrong was me because I slapped him in the face. No, I warned him that I would if he ever did that again. I didn't actually think that he was going to do it again. I thought he would be so stupid. But and literally the family turned against me.
Yeah.
I could have called the cops at that point.
Yeah.
And had that man arrested.
Yeah, if we speculate a bit, would the brethren stop drinking if the Mog stopped drinking?
It's a very interesting question because we said right at the beginning, so we've come full circle, it starts at the top, didn't we? And you wonder if Bruce Hales issued an edict that alcohol is banned. I mean, let's just fantasize for a moment, shall we?
Yeah, speculate.
What effect would that have? If he said that, right, no more alcohol when you're entertaining, no more alcohol in the breaks.
Oh, mate, there'd be riots. It would be the same level as riots as if the UK said we're not selling alcohol in our superstores anymore.
I think they'd do it just simply because they're following a rule. But I think the effect, because of what we've spoken of, like, you know, how many of them use it as a coping mechanism? How many use it as a...
The effect would be devastating.
Yeah,
it would be done underhandedly, wouldn't it?
Casualties would be devastating.
Yeah. So there'd probably be a lot of secret drinking going on because people couldn't go cold. Some may not be able to go cold turkey on it, just without any help.
But in Strive 24, sorry, Ross, go on.
No, I was going to say I can see it going one or two ways. Like Gilly said, they'd either, you know, totally lap it up and do what the Mog said, or mass walkouts.
Yeah.
Sorry, Abby, you were going to say about stroke.
No, I'm just having a giggle. Yeah. Sorry.
It's just occurred, you know, you're speculating what would actually the response be. Go on, Abby, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I've received some Strive 24 notes of this thing where they just spent 80 grand on.
So just to explain, Strive 24 is a business seminar, is it? Is that right?
It was for business owners, but it was not really a business seminar. I mean, they went over figures of the whole of I think they're basically trying to wheedle out the traitors and the information givers, but it hasn't worked because I've got notes.
Okay.
But yeah, it went over everything, like what's going to happen in the schools, how to care for others, financial plans, moral plans, family plans, GFT plans.
You just thought that Abby, in the family plan thing, can you just, there was something said, I think, about repairing relationships.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me just find it 1 second. Family, yeah. Put your family first. Mend your family relationships and restore trust with each other. Take low ground and make your company attractive.
So I would just like to say to the people in the Brethren that you've got family outside of the Brethren, and they're no different to family in the Brethren, and we're all here. Yeah. And we're all happy to hear from you, and you can contact us. This doesn't just mean family in the Brethren. Well, maybe it does, but yeah, I think that's quite a poignant phrase. Restore family relationships. Yeah. We're all here waiting. Our doors are open, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he said you have to care for your family and wear a smile on your dial. Seriously. You have to wear it. It can't be naturally happy. You have to wear it. Okay? Anyway, but back to the health thing, which was a health plan. So intervene your red flags and get a plan in place ahead of time before a problem may arise. You might have to push back on drinking and very politely decline social events or business travels. And then someone said, they didn't actually put who this was, that the doctor, Bruce House's doctor, told him once that he can't have a party every day.
Okay.
So this reiterates our thesis. Right term is that this issue does really come from the top, I'm afraid.
So at Stride 24, they're saying cut back on alcohol.
Push back on drinking.
Push back on drinking.
Don't worry that we've just spent £80,000 on Johnny Label Black Walker.
So we have some statistics.
No, Johnny Walker Black Label.
Yeah. And we actually have some statistics from an insider, which is very useful for us. There were 36 pallets of alcohol consumed. Beer, wine and spirits were served at 8 bar tables. Complete open access. Drinking began at the opening of the meetings at 9 a.m. And 3 pallets of Johnny Walker Black Label were consumed within the first hour. So I don't know if that's
you wonder when they're saying things like that. Your first thought is there a very, very small glimmer of hope that they're realising at the top that the drinking has to be addressed for well-being?
Not really, because they're like, here's the rule, here's the alcohol.
This is this is my.
You lead by example, and that doesn't seem to be happening, does it?
No.
And I think, before we close up, what I'd want to say, and we can all say it to anybody inside, what this podcast has been about, it's been to sort of delve into the drinking culture and why it's there. But secondly, to say, you don't have to live your life by alcohol. And if you're using alcohol to get through in life, there's an issue. That's my opinion. If you're using it because you enjoy a drink socially, that's one thing. But if you're using it to get through in life, and there's also the consequences of alcohol, which I think if somebody gets drunk, they are less likely to behave. Well, that's sometimes when domestic abuse happens, doesn't it? When it's alcohol fueled. So you're going to get all those traumas coming out as well. And I'd want to say to somebody many people that have left the Brethren are testament to the fact that the alcohol issues can be addressed and you can come out the other side. And we will post links for help, but I don't think you're going to get the help you need in there. It's not going to come from insiders. They shut down the one support group that was there trying to help people. So, I don't know what other people's thoughts are on that for the people inside that may listen to this.
Yeah, I was just going to pick you up on that, Jackie. You say they shut down the one support group that was in there, and yet they're counselling and drinking spirits in front of people that are struggling with alcohol. So, there is no help.
No. I don't want to give them no hope there is absolutely no hope for them, because there are cases of people that haven't touched alcohol for, 20 years, but their addiction has just gone straight into something else.
Yeah.
So the actual addiction hasn't been dealt with. It's just gone from this to that.
Yeah. And the other point, sorry, Ross.
I was going to say, if you've got an addictive personality, if you stop one addiction, or if you stop, if you will substitute something else for the addiction that you've given up or stopped.
Yeah, if you're deep down not getting your needs met, like talk about it in hierarchy,
your Maslow hierarchy of needs.
You probably will be trying to find ways to cope, whatever those are.
Yeah.
Which is a perfectly natural thing to do.
Yeah.
But when it goes into dangerous territory, like addiction to anything, I mean, we've mainly, this is a podcast mainly about alcohol and alcoholism, but addiction of any kind, because, I know of people that are using drugs within the PBCC, which would be a lot more frowned upon than alcohol, which just is bizarre because it's the same thing ultimately.
Yeah, I was multiply addicted whilst in there. So, it
must be that unless you address, and Ross, you can probably comment on this much more like him, unless you address the root cause of the problem, the addiction will come out in another way. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, unless you address the emotional side of things, the addiction will come out in another form.
Yeah.
And it's getting at the root of your emotions and understanding your emotions and what are good emotions and what are bad emotions, etc. You need to. It's the psychological that needs to be sorted out.
Which unfortunately, there was a question put on the Facebook group, wasn't there, about how brethren deal with their emotions. I was told when I was in there by a counsellor/therapist, which admittedly was a PEEB appointed one, that I have no emotional spectrum or maturity. Now, that particular counsellor, I probably won't mention her name, but she was in Manchester, and I think a lot of people would have definitely been to see her because she was like the brethren. She's done bloody well out of brethren addicts. Like, wow.
Yeah, but I think the crux of that is, Abby, when you're in the brethren, we said it earlier, you crush your traumas. You don't. You don't have a chance. I
didn't know my emotions.
No,
I had no idea.
They were in a big bottle somewhere, locked away.
You're not allowed to show emotion in the brethren. That's the trouble. And until you can sort that out, and your psychological state of mind, you will just replace one addiction for another.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can guarantee, if anyone is listening to this on the inside, the one thing from the comments we've just been making, there'll be people who are looking at it and go, well, I'm not an addict. So I think the other thing we need to address here is that if you're drinking out of peer pressure, just because it's the cool thing to do, there is, you can step away from that. And it's the sheer levels of alcohol. And just like as a practical example, so before I left the Peeps, I'd made a drinks cabinet that was in Dad and Mum's house, and that drinks cabinet would have got restocked once a month, maybe once every 2 months. I had it then after I left the Peeps, and when I moved to Sweden, which was 4 or 5 years after I'd left the Peeps, when we first got that drinks cabinet out of Dad and Mum's house and into our own house, I did a booze shop that would have been a monthly shop in the Peeps. 4 or 5 years down the line, there was still alcohol that wasn't opened, just because I didn't have the same pressure and attraction to drink.
Yes. We're the same, actually.
I think there's so many people in there who aren't actually that bothered about alcohol, but just drink because it's the done thing.
Yeah.
I mean, and
they feel they have to.
And it's not to put anything about myself, excuse me.
Yeah.
But I can go for weeks without an alcoholic drink if I don't think about it, because it doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know
Not
for
your
well
life.
if I'd been if I was still in the peeps, I wouldn't be doing it because of how much pressure I'd be under to have that drink.
Very toxic culture, isn't it?
I know we've talked a lot about addiction, and I must admit I do get on my soapbox when it comes to that subject.
It's okay. It's dear to you, Ross. You've worked it through.
Somebody says, though, a lot of it in there is probably just peer pressure. Just because you're drinking all the time doesn't necessarily mean you're an addict, because if that culture wasn't there, you may find that you could actually go without a drink for weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's when it changes your behaviour that it's a problem.
Yeah.
And your emotions.
Yeah. And when you get behind a wheel of a car and drive, having had too much, it's a problem. I think it might be an idea to put those 4 questions you picked out and praised, Ross, actually at the bottom of the podcast, because I think if any insider could read them, and even if they don't answer them honestly to anybody else, can answer them honestly to themselves, that might be step number 1 to realizing that they personally need some help with alcohol. I mean, I think the whole system, I think the whole culture of drinking in there needs addressing, but that's a much bigger problem, isn't it?
But that's out here with our tiny little megaphone.
Yeah, we do our bit. Yeah. But I think if the realization that drinking is a problem, even if 1 or 2 mothers stopped giving their babies port at the supper, this podcast would have been worthwhile. Just said, I'm not doing it. It's illegal. I'm not doing it. I would feel that that's a milestone.
Hard to do, though. It's hard to do.
Very hard to do. Very hard. But if 1 or 2 did it, that would be a little, a start, however small.
Be prepared to stand on your own and do it, though. Because I stood on my own and did it. And because he was my child, no one could touch him.
And I would say, if you are a mum in the brethren and having listened, you do not want to give, hearing what Abby said about not giving her son drink, and Anne said feeling guilty, and you decide you don't want to do it and you want support, you could email the info@getalife email, and you'll get support that way. Or contact the Olive Leaf Network. They also will signpost you for support to stand to what you believe. Yeah, to help you. Yeah,
I think that's a good note to finish on.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's been a fascinating talk.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
If you are in a high-demand religious group and need help, please go to oliveleaf.network. To share your story or be a guest on the show, email info.getalife@proton.me. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to Get a Life, and comment.